Welcome to my podcast, Cyberglass Ceiling. I'm going to have a light-hearted fireside chat with some people who are leaders in the industry of cybersecurity. Prominent for the fact that they are either women, people of colour, LGBTQ, or just different. The term glass ceiling refers to sometimes invisible barriers to success that many come up against in their careers. A management consultant called Marilyn Loden coined the phrase almost 40 years ago regarding women rising to senior positions and says it's still as relevant as ever today. So I've taken it a little step further, not just women, but people of colour and bias that may exist in the workplace and how they overcame this to become leaders in the industry. I promise not too much swearing, no politics or religion, just a cuppa and whatever takes your fancy. Hello and welcome to my next episode of Cyberglass Ceiling. Today I am stateside. I'm talking to a chap called Warren Small, who's all the way over in California. And let me just tell you a little bit about Warren before we get started. Vice President of Managed Security Services for Dimension Data Group, Vice President of Transformation Group, Security Business Unit, Senior Vice President, Global Head of Sales and Innovation, and New Ventures and Innovations. Warren, welcome to Cyberglass Ceiling.
Charles, what an incredible pleasure. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. Thank you for the opportunity to connect with your audience.
Why, thank you. It's great meeting you. I know we've had a little conversation a little while back, and it's great to have you here, my first stateside interview. So before we get started, I've reeled off some of your titles that you've had with a certain company called NTT, stroke Dimension Data or Dimension Data. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Thank you so much, Charles. Hopefully you can still hear that I'm South African, not American. Hopefully you can still hear that I'm a guy that is still got both feet in the ground. I am not only the son of a woman who didn't finish high school, just couldn't afford to finish high school, but I'm an incredibly lucky husband to an amazing woman who came into my life at a point where I think I needed clarity, or I think I needed a clear path. Mm-hmm. In an early age, I was very keen on studying law and very keen to help my community. And I think that's all true to my DNA and the reason I'm in the role that I'm in now, but helping a different community. Because I think I'm a serial connector, but want to connect people with the right people and make sure that we all live a full life. I was brought up in a city called Durban. And for many people who know South Africa would know that 99% might get the percentage wrong. It might be 99.5% or 99.9%. People never leave Durban. And if they do leave Durban, they'll come back because it's just such a beautiful place to live. And the human beings are incredible. You know, I've traveled to many places around the world and I still don't feel the heart and energy like Durbanite. And if you ever have an opportunity, I encourage you to spend it with someone that you love. And it gave me sort of grounding to who I am today, because Durban was a place that many people would always come back to and show us, where they were and what they had achieved. And very fast forward from, wanting to become a lawyer, is I had a dream of living in the United States, because many family members in a community would come back from the United States, with a baseball hat or a football hat, and they always looked a little bit trendy and cool, people that I identified with. And that was something I was going to do. I was going to move to the USA. I was going to be this lawyer after helping my community. And I find myself in a role where I'm now surrounded with some of the smartest individuals that I would ever know. And some of the most incredibly, talented individuals in the industry that are not only creating some of the solutions and some of the things that we use today in our everyday life, but some of the people that are investing in some of these future technologies.
Fantastic. Amazing. Now, I know your journey just didn't take you to America. It took you to Australia as well. And we'll touch on that a bit later. Again, because I find it very fascinating that, guy from South Africa, Durban, ends up in one, Australia, and then in the US of A, in California. And it's a brilliant journey to discuss, and the ups and downs and the peaks and the flows that goes with it, as we all know. So thank you for that introduction to who you are. Let's get into it. And I have a few questions. You know how anyone that listens regularly to the podcast, I have a few questions that absolutely nothing to do with cybersecurity until we get to a couple of questions and we touch on it and understand your expertise. But it's about you. The podcast and my questions are about you as a human being, what makes you, what drives you, the success, and to celebrate where you are now. On that, first ever job.
Yes. First ever job was multiple, right? As a young Durbanite, you're always looking to make an alternate source of income. And I passionately remember working in the early hours of the morning at one of the largest then food retailers, packing shelves. And, in the true spirit of the narrative of this call, some of the roles you were given were not the ideal ones. So I was given chance the role to not only unpack frozen chickens from trucks, but I had to then rearrange them on shelves within the store to make sure that the most current date of expiry is at the front and the latest date of expiry of chickens is at the back. And, for anyone who's worked in retail, for anyone who's packed shelves, they would tell you packing shelves is not easy, but because it takes a lot of patience, but packing frozen chickens is kind of got to be the worst. That was my first job that I actually earned money. But first, professional role was at a large global services company in South Africa, which is now known as Vodafone, but they were in South Africa called Vodacom. And that was my first role. And I had to go and meet with ship captains to talk to them about their contract that they were signing. So there was legal connection, and educate them on the core tariffs and how expensive it would be if they exceeded the minutes that we had allocated to them. So that was my first professional role, which I thought was incredibly exciting because I'd get to meet all these people, some people who barely spoke a word of English, but would have to understand an English contract. So that was my first professional role.
And would that be on the legal sense, or
was a combination of both? I mean, we didn't call it legal then, but because we were signing contracts with these individuals, so it was more commercial role, and we were signing, we were in essence making money off these ships.
So you were compensated for the contracts.
We were compensated for the overusage of minutes.
Understood. Back then, wow, I can remember it well. So, what attracted you to the world of IT and cybersecurity? Did you have to get reskilled? Were you certified? How did that work?
Quite an emotional story for me because, deep down, I think I'm still passionate about law. I think I'm still passionate about the fact that people don't realize they've done something wrong until they are incarcerated, or until they end up in court. Because I tell a story that people end up in a world of crime because they got away with something and nobody told them it was wrong, and then they do something a little more serious, and not only someone told them it's wrong, but they now are, they have to reap the consequences, behind
of their actions,
behind four walls, and that becomes their life. I am so emotional that because I still feel very, very passionate about educating people about doing the right thing, but passionate because a very near and dear friend of mine knew that I was interested in earning a better income. And he said to me, "Warren, why don't you come and help me pull Ethernet cable?" I didn't even know it was called Ethernet cable at the time. "Why don't you come and help me pull Ethernet cable at the largest newspaper in Durban on a Saturday morning?" And I had no idea what he was doing or why we were doing it. But all I knew was, I was getting paid by eating a great, what they call euro. At the time, it was not Subway like they have here in the US. It was a euro. And I thought it was great because it was two good friends, it was a family friend, and we were pulling cable. And then, my reward was, a little bit of rands at the end of the day. But, I got to spend time with the guy that I respected, and we'd eat a euro together, or we'd share a euro. So that's what got me into the world of IT, because I got to understand from him sort of the significance around that Ethernet cable. There were two things at either end of that cable that needed connectivity. And fast forward, we then started doing some work with a local travel agency, which was a large travel agency. And I got to learn about this system called Galileo.
Ah,
And the system called Galileo was a system that everybody in the world would use to buy tickets on planes or buy tickets on any kind of transportation. So I thought it was pretty cool, the whole world. And then I ended up in office of a service provider or an internet service provider. And I was lucky because I happened to be at that office on the day where there was a wonderful woman who clearly took a liking to me, or took a liking to the fact that I was so engaging in conversation, because I was looking to learn, and I'm always looking to learn. And she asked me if I'd consider getting into a role at the service provider. And I said, absolutely, because you never say no to an opportunity, especially in Durban. People will tell you, opportunities don't come by that often. And, years later, I would move to Johannesburg, and years later I would move to North America, and years later I'd be helping my company now not only identify some of the emerging technologies, but invest in the right technologies that will protect society.
C-Vision International is a global event and advisory firm dedicated to convening leading visionaries in an exclusive environment for peer-to-peer collaboration. Our programs highlight critical business challenges and deliver the best available applied sciences aimed to change the world. Your vision is our mission. Let us help you build your company's future today, not tomorrow.
now you have to excuse me because I'm guessing I am slightly older than yourself. I know I am, and I have a picture of South Africa, which is slightly different. Understanding growing up in a time where Nelson Mandela was incarcerated and apartheid was coming to an end, and I suppose listening to you speak there, opportunity was good. Opportunity to rise was good. There wasn't so much as a, well, you don't represent me, you're not like me, so I'm not employing you type scenario.
I think quite the opposite, Charles. My wife and I had this conversation last night. All my friends, every one of my friends, or people that I consider, sort of helped me form to who I am today, are all still in Durban, not just South Africa. So, sort of that 99.5, 99.9, never leave. And they don't leave because there is no opportunity. And you can't just make the move to Johannesburg, because even though it's 6 hours away by car, 50 minutes by plane, it's a different economic system completely, and if you grew up in Durban, you earn a third of what people in Johannesburg earned. So, you're always on the back foot, and you could never. And, if you look at the demographics of South Africa, you understand that, look at the economic demographics, the amount of business in South Africa, the amount of business in Durban is, there's a stark contrast of what's available in Durban versus what's available in Johannesburg. And I'll tell you, people know that if you want a corporate career, you have to move to Johannesburg. And if you want a corporate career in Johannesburg, there's no, housing is is not cheap. So you always have to find someone who's got a spare room. And I remember very passionately, my wife and I now was then my fiance. We stayed with my sister for the first 6 months, and it was a difficult task because you're living in the home of someone else, and you having to get up a little earlier so you're not inconveniencing them, and you have to get up a little earlier than inconveniencing them, and to get on the road to get to where you were in terms of your corporate career. And I remember quite passionately a song by Nelly Furtado, and that was my wife and I our song. And so whenever it comes on now, we both smile at each other because that was the hour and a half drive from the East Rand of Johannesburg to Sandton City, the central part of it, where I know where the economic hub was. So it wasn't that easy, Charles. Even though I think there was change, there was still a quota system. So for every, I would say, for every one role there were probably, I'd say, 10 people of color trying for the role. And there was, maybe one other person that was not of color that was applying for the role because, they didn't need to apply for a role. They were in a situation where, their parents had businesses, or they were going to work in, parents' friends' business. So
Yes.
it was never that challenge, right? And I remember some of my friends when we were at university. I studied law, so I fell to some of the law firms, and I'd look at it, right, and look around the room, and it was the only person. But Charles is no different to today. I still say it. I walk into a room today, and I'm the only person of color, and I often joke, with people. I say, you got to change the website. You got to change the website. You go to any corporate website today, you look at the color, and you're like, what is going on? And we're supposed to be in a world that's more progressive, where the USA has had the first black president, and still nothing has really changed.
No. Well, that brings me on to my next question. And I'm going to mix around a bit because I don't need to ask a load of them. But now,
Yep.
as a leader in your workplace, have you seen that shift in culture of promoting people of colour like yourself? And of course, now you're at the top table. Are you influential in setting that diversity goals? And I asked the question, and what do you think about it twice? Because you spent how many years in Australia?
I spent 8 years in Australia.
8 years in Australia. Did you see a change in diversity where you were in Australia? And have you seen change now that you're in the US?
So I think the one thing I live by is telling the truth, right? And I think there's absolutely a lot of point for people to be more inclusive. But I think there's still such a deep-rooted unconscious bias and form narratives that kind of pull at that desire to be more inclusive, because we make the assumption, right? We make the assumption that a woman is married to a man, right? I remember a conversation, and we were talking about a niece of ours, and the person said to us, "Oh, what does her husband do?" And we're like, we had to pause, right? We're like, "No, she's actually married to a woman, right?" But beautiful young woman, right? Beautiful young woman, absolutely not. Her life's choices, you know, have absolutely no relevance on who she is as a human being.
Exactly.
But the world still stereotypes what she should be doing, right? Or who she should be loving, or who she should be married to. So I'd say there's absolutely a desire. If I look at Australia as a country, they absolutely have a deep intent to be inclusive through a number of programs, both in the workplace, outside of the workplace. I think everybody has a voice. Every city is looks like an inclusive city. You don't have areas of segregation, so it looks inclusive. But I think there's still, elements. If you go into rural Australia, I think you'll still see, a lot of stereotypes that are, imposed upon people.
No, absolutely. Because again, we had the conversation. I only spent 10 days in Australia, and I was in Perth, Western Australia, and I had an amazing time. Everybody was very friendly, saying g'day, hello, whatever it is, whether I be by the beach or in town. I remember it was Australia Day in January, and I said to you, because no one batted an eyelid, no one even gave me a side eye about who's this black Englishman, walking down in my pub or whatever it may be. And you're a little bit surprised at that because I know you had a slightly different reaction, but again, you were in a different city in Australia, and I'm talking now and I'm still smiling about my
Yeah.
journey. And you said something funny because you said, well, they knew you were leaving. So you're only there for a short time. I went, maybe so. But, I still find Australia fascinating, and I don't want to get political, so I won't do. But, if things don't change around in the UK soon, it's a great place to go, I think, Australia.
Yeah.
But we digress, and I understand. And now you're in the US. Now that, again, you've got this incredible career, you've had more titles than Pete Sampras or whoever. I'm just trying to think of an American tennis player now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And or Rafa Nadal or those guys. And is there a push for promoting and diversity and even people with neurodiversity? Is there a push for that, or is it still?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. There's definitely a push, but I'll tell you a story because, I very recently had the privilege, had the pleasure of being at a event, a security event, which was an event to identify founders, and where, so, just listen to the words I'm using, an event to identify founders. We call it Silicon Valley, call it investment community, showed up, and they're looking to speak to people, network with people that had great ideas. And I just think to myself, there was no bias there. There was no, you had to be of a certain color because it was an event and it was in a location that was, for me, I smiled because it was not even typical, stereotype event, at the water where everyone is kind of nicely dressed. It was, in the heart of Southern California, and there was no bias. I think there's absolutely an intent. I think if you look at Silicon Valley today, and if you look at the largest companies, and if you look at the profiles of the leaders of some of those technology companies, there's definitely a change. There's definitely a strong illustration that you don't have to be of a certain profile to be a leader of a large technology firm. If you just look at some of the bigger companies, whether it's Microsoft or Palo Alto or VMware, you don't have to be of a certain profile, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we still got a while to go in terms of inclusion for women. I think that's a big area of focus, especially in my business today, and because I tell you, I work with some of the most incredible women, and I'm married to one of the most incredible women. They can do so much more. It's in their DNA, it's in their makeup, right? They literally can spin plates on their 4 appendages. We ask us to do it on 2, and we kind of get confused. Right? They just have a natural tendency. So I think we need to be a little bit more accommodating with women. But I would say to you, you answer your question, yes, inclusive, yes, there's no bias because at this event there was an illustration, but I think there's still room to be done, work to be done.
Understood. And there's an old saying that I think we all know is, I need to speak to the boss, or before I do that, I need to speak to the boss, and the boss is the wife. So
I asked my wife if I can be the boss.
So moving on, as we're both you're in cybersecurity, and you've had this amazing career, as I said. I want to touch on some of the challenges that sometimes keep you awake at night, and what you've heard over the years. As the world recovers from COVID, I know in the US it was a bit crazy. I was in California, 2019. in January 2020, I think, January 2020. And it was all kicking off, especially in California. And I remember flying back, and you know, the whole COVID thing was, rife in the US for one reason or another. Again, we're not getting political, but if you want to drink bleach or inject yourself with it, that's a good blooming start. But the challenges since then, I'm just trying to see how different it is from what's happened in the UK, and speaking to some of your counterparts here, where people decided, oh, I'm working from home, and working from
Yeah.
home is the new norm. We're more productive.
Yeah.
We don't collaborate as much, and so now, especially in 2023, people are starting to creep back into the office a few days a week. Not on a Friday by the looks of it, because I was on the train this morning and there was no one around. It was kind of empty. But is that the same over there?
I'd say yes. I will tell you, Charles, I left South Africa in 2007, and and a big and a big life lesson for me was remote working. 2007, I worked for a Panera Bread most days because I needed to be close to people. Because when you grow up in corporate South Africa, you go into a big office or an office park, where you're always in meetings, in offices with lots of people around. So I had to go to a Panera Bread, which was close to my home, because I just needed to be around people. I thrive on other people's energy. It's just who I am. But I'd say from 2007 to 2023, if you ask me, is there a big difference? I'd say absolutely. I think conferencing is now sort of more prevalent. It's one of the mediums. I think we are always on in terms of communication channels. So whether it's a Slack channel, or whether it's a Teams channel, or whether it's a LinkedIn communication platform, people don't talk about that. But I think we do more communication on LinkedIn than what we do on any other platform. Be it kind of social media posting about something interesting in our career, or communicating with someone about a meeting. Now you can even schedule live meetings, you attend training. So I think it's an incredible platform. But I will say that the biggest challenge that we have is in the industry called cyber, is everyone wants to be their own boss. If I kind of go midway to my career, where I was in Australia, a lot of companies, but just because again of the economic environment and the demographics of skilled labor in Australia, there was always a narrative of importing talent. There was always a narrative of outcasting key functions. Kind of that language. You learn. No one teaches that language about outtasking, right? Outtasking, not outsourcing, but the specific function you want to give it to these people because they can be more efficient with it. But I knew in Australia there was a big demographic of people who wanted to be contract labor, because if you were contract labor, you could earn twice your daily rate, so you could double your salary. And if we kind of doing the math, generally we'd say if we're doubling our daily rate and doubling our monthly income, we shouldn't be working half the time, right? Logic. Some people would then take 3 or 6 months off, right? And it's very much a culture of, I'm going to go and travel and see Australia. But if we look at the demographics in North America, I think that's been we had a big push of outsourcing, offshoring, and now there's a big pull back into the USA, because one, it's about conversation, two, dialects, three, it's about having local resources. But I would say skill is critical in cybersecurity. And we want more of that skill to be in person. We want more of that skill to be local. We want more of that skill to be, close to us so we can engage.
Understood. Now, I know time's upon us, and I know you've got another meeting at the top of the hour. So I've got a couple more questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go.
Yes.
So Warren Small, 20 years old. What advice would you give to a young Warren Small that wants to get into the business of cybersecurity, have a career, and have the success you've had?
Well, there was no YouTube then, right? So So it'd be a little bit hard, but I would say read, and be more open to what conversations are being held around you, right? Don't be so laser focused. Don't be so rigid in your pursuit of greatness or your pursuit of growth. But be more open. Be more mindful of what's being said around you, because everything was everything around cyber was critical then, and everything around cyber is critical now. But there were just less people then versus the amount of people there are now. We still don't have that many, right? We talk about 3.5 million roles. I just saw at Google now have a cybersecurity certificate that you can go do for free, right? Because they talk about so many roles. But then there's also this big push for AI skills, right? So it's am I going to be a defender, or am I going to be an attacker, right? So I would say I would say be more open, be more mindful, and listen and collaborate more.
Thank you. And that's enough of the serious stuff. 2 more questions. Now, I don't know if I texted you this question or emailed you this question, but I want you to think about your unique selling point. But before you do, how does Warren relax? How does he chill out? Like I said, you've got an amazing career. You've got an amazing job. You talk about your wife, and every time you speak about your wife, you're smiling. And so I'm just trying to understand what you do for fun? How do you relax?
Yeah, so I run. I'm a big runner. My wife's a runner as well. I'm training for everybody listening. I'm training for the Comrades Marathon, which is a rite of passage. So my hobby is running, and I try now and run 10 kilometers a day.
Wow.
Which is not easy. Charles, because you get a little bit exhausted. But I'm big into family. So I try and do as much as possible with the family, whether it's watching a movie or whether it's playing a game of tennis or whether it's going to a nice restaurant that we will all enjoy. It's about family. That's where I get a lot of my energy, is from my wife and my 2 boys.
Fantastic. Good answer. And final question, Warren. What do you think your unique selling point is? What is it about you, your USP?
I have to say that I don't have a preconceived idea of anything or anyone. And I'm always open to learning about anything and anyone. And that's why I have friends, in all countries. I'm off to India on Sunday, and I must have connected with at least a dozen people to say that I'm going to be in India and would love to connect, right? And then I had to pause and say, shucks, I haven't seen some of these people in years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we still communicate like we were talking yesterday.
Yep.
So I think that's my unique differentiator. And I think if you ask anyone who knows me, I think they'd say the same person, right? Respectful, supportive, caring, and passionate human being.
Fantastic. Warren Small, global leader, entrepreneur, innovator, board advisor, board observer, investor, and a cybersecurity visionary. Thank you for the time on coming on to Cyber Glass Ceiling. It's been fun.
Thank you, Charles. What an incredible honor, and I wish you everything of the best. This is the start of great things for us. I'm optimistic, and I look forward to our next conversation where we celebrate some of our successes.
This episode was brought to you by Salt Cybersecurity, part of Salt Group, who specialise in providing trust across digital channels by helping major financial institutions verify the identity of their users and authenticating high-value transactions in the UK and globally.